I've had a truck come out on the runway twice that I can remember very vividly. I'm not sure if it was airport maintenance or what, but it was both times on short final, and the truck was not on any pavement surfaces, and all of a sudden there it was crossing my runway. One of the times I remember it was far enough back I probably could have landed long over it without even adjusting my path of travel, but it alarmed me and distracted me to such an extent that I wanted just to start over. And the other time it was a bit up the runway. And I just remember looking at the truck and thinking, he's not going to stop. He's going to go right across the runway.
Somebody will enter across the runway without even knowing it. They'll just drive out there on a runway and scoot across, whether it's a maintenance individual or a private contractor that's doing some contracting work, or an airfield management person that was distracted and just happened to drive on the runway. That was the main issues with runway incursions. Very few did I ever have an aircraft just cross the runway without asking.
I've had that happen to me over the course of my career. A vehicle crossed the runway with an airplane on less than a half-mile final. And that is what we call a pucker factor.
I was taxiing on a taxiway at Midway Airport, and there was a conga line of snowplows that was on a closed runway headed sort of in our direction. We were going to be intersecting the runway, and we were cleared to taxi across that closed runway. And the conga line of snowplows was supposed to they were not supposed to hold short of our taxiway. They were supposed to hold short of a runway that was just to the left of us. But they were proceeding, and I was keeping an eye on them, and they looked like they were going kind of fast. And so even though I knew that we had been cleared to taxi across the runway, I did key up on the radio and I asked ground control. I said, are we supposed to give way to these snowplows, or are they going to give way to us?
When we think of airports, we tend to think about aircraft operations. But especially at large airports, there might be more ground vehicles than aircraft operating at any given point during the day. What role do these vehicles play, and what kind of training is required? Kim Kenville, airport management professor, explains.
Well, there's a couple types of ground vehicles. There's airport operations and airport maintenance, which is the local jurisdiction, whether it's a city, county, or airport authority. It's those workers that actually would drive on the taxiways and runways to maintain them and inspect them. The other set is the ground vehicles that the airlines and the fuel tenders, and if you've got outsourced baggage workers, those workers kind of right in and around the gate area, running the tugs, the baggage carts, fuel tenders. They kind of present another set of problems. There's so many of them that they're very hard to kind of keep tabs on, and it's hard to know their level of training that they've received to be out there. So kind of two groups that we're working with on the airport, on the tarmac, as we like to say, and so each kind of present their own challenges. You receive airfield familiarization training, and in the case when I worked at Detroit, it was about 2 weeks of classroom training where we learned all the runways. You learn their identifiers, why they're numbered the way they are, right, left, center. You learned all the associated taxiways and all the ramp areas. Detroit was fairly complex in that we had tower and ground, and then we had 2 towers and 2 grounds, basically east-west division of the field were different frequencies. After we went through the actual, like, I would say classroom portion of it, we went out on the airfield. And so we drove probably, I would say, at least 15 hours of controlled driving, where they would say, okay, go to taxiway Alpha 4, and you'd have to get from your spot on the ramp out to Alpha 4. When you got out there, they'd say, okay, you need to go to Juliet 7. And you'd need to tell air traffic control how you'd need to get there, and they may send you the way you ask, they may not, and you have to obey, their signals and their communications. After we did that, we actually weren't allowed to drive the airfield individually for about, I'd say 2 to 3 months, even when we got off training. Just because of the runway incursion. It's a very delicate situation out there. And so you had to work, which I thought was unique, you had to work a day shift, an afternoon shift, and a midnight shift. And you were checked on each shift by the supervisor in kind of a test on the airfield of inspection. And once you passed the night inspection, which at night you wouldn't think is a big deal, but everything's illuminated and it does look totally different. And so once you passed all those 3 phases, you were, I guess, turned loose on your own to drive the airfield. But it was a very cautious situation, and when they actually then let you go out on your own. But on the airfield side, when we're talking to air traffic control on the controlled side, the training is very rigorous. And I had colleagues that failed training because they couldn't communicate, they couldn't use the air traffic control lingo, as we say, and so they didn't pass training and they were relieved from their job. So it's pretty serious on the airport, on the actual runways and taxiways. On the uncontrolled side of the ramp, where you're working in and around the airplanes, the training varies. They're required to have training, but we don't actually say what it has to consist of. And so normally they'll watch a videotape, they'll take a test, and then they'll probably drive with another supervisor for a specified amount of time. Pretty much as far as the airport's concerned, they have to check the box that they've had the training.
When vehicles operate on the controlled areas of an airport, which includes areas under the jurisdiction of air traffic control, such as runways, taxiways, and certain portions of the ramp, they must be in communication with ATC and have equipment like rotating beacons and other lighting aids in order to be visible to pilots.
Stationary ground vehicles are very small, from a distance, and they blend in very well.
What kinds of vehicles might be operating at an airport?
There's a ton of ground vehicles that are running all over the place.
So you might have road graders, you might have brooms, you might have snow plows, you might have snow blowers.
You'll have vehicular traffic out doing braking actions and plows and brooms and all kinds of different things moving on the apron that you wouldn't normally have moving, de-icing. It's an unbelievable gambit in the wintertime.
You might have sweepers in the spring. Certainly in the summer you're going to have lawn mowing that goes right up to the edge of the runway. And then airport operations, pickups, explorers, expeditions, things like that.
These vehicles are performing all kinds of different operations, from field maintenance to baggage handling, fuel and catering, and transportation of passengers and airport employees. Snow removal, in particular, can play havoc with airport operations.
You're looking at multiple crews of maintenance, probably removing snow on a couple different runways and associated taxiways at any given time.
All this vehicle traffic can sometimes be unsettling for pilots.
From the pilot's perspective, they're complete unknowns. They aren't doing the same operations, so you're not listening for them on the radio. Whereas if you're, a little business jet and maybe I'm in a 727 and we're both taxiing, we're both going to do about the same kinds of things. We're going to be taxiing on the center line. We want to go from a runway to a ramp or something like that. Whereas if you've got an airport maintenance truck or a lawnmower, their objectives are completely different. They want to cross pavement services and get somewhere else. They don't use the same radio phraseology, unfortunately, in practice. And they may be going in a direction we don't expect.
Sometimes you see vehicles traveling just a little bit too fast, or a little bit faster than they really need to be going. Particularly if you're going to be crossing one of those vehicle service areas, sometimes it's questionable as to whether the guy is going to stop or whether he's going to try to hit the gas and shoot the gap before you get there.
We mentioned pedestrians earlier in this episode, but what are they exactly?
Well, typically a pedestrian is going to be somebody working on the ramp, loading bags, a fuel tender. As a person, you're very small out there. The airplane's very big. The jet engines are powerful. They can suck up things. The other pedestrians you might have, airport operations, you might leave the vehicle to go retrieve some FOD, some foreign object debris. And so then you're walking on the ramp or the taxiway or the runway, and a lot of big airplanes are operating around you. That's a little daunting.
Controllers expect both vehicle operators and pedestrians to be trained and certified to operate on the airport surface. But controllers should be aware that their experience and knowledge may vary considerably, especially when they're in training.
The controller may assume that the ground vehicle has as much knowledge as the controller or an airplane pilot, and that's simply not the case. You may have someone that didn't go to an aviation university, has never flown an airplane, and they're just learning these skills for the first time. So we need some, I guess, not hand-holding, but just kind of some understanding that we are all not on the same training level.
Even though we focused on large airports so far, pilots and controllers should be aware that vehicles are present at small airports too. And the fact that there isn't as much vehicle traffic at these airports may make spotting them more difficult.
Even at small regional airports, we still have airport vehicles doing runway inspections. You've got snow plows, you have mowers. So no matter what time of year it is, no matter how big an airport it is, airport vehicles are out there.
Regardless of the size of the airport, controllers must recognize that they should pay as much attention to vehicles as they do to aircraft, since vehicles may not be as visible to controllers or pilots.
Because those airplanes sit very high and those vehicles are low, and they're busy too. So I think everyone just needs to slow down and pay a little bit closer attention.
Coming up next, we'll take another look at the runway incursion scenario we saw at the beginning of this episode and break down the errors step by step to see what happened and how it could have ended differently.
Why are hold short lines placed where they are? A, no reason. It's up to the airport authorities to place them in an appropriate location. B, they denote the beginning of the runway obstacle-free zone. C, they show the suggested holding position for aircraft and vehicles. D, they provide a visual reference for controllers when deciding where to hold aircraft. The correct answer is B. Hold short lines denote the beginning of the runway obstacle-free zone. True or false? All parts of an aircraft or vehicle must be behind the hold short line when holding short of a runway. The answer is true. If any portion of an aircraft or vehicle extends beyond the hold short line, it is penetrating the obstacle-free zone and is considered to be on the runway.